Hi everyone, my name is Viola Allo, and the title of my presentation is California Wildfire Risk Communication Strategies for Public Agencies. In this presentation, I discuss California wildfire risk communication with a focus on effective strategies and tools for risk communication. I argue that effective wildfire risk communication must happen pre-fire, well in advance of a wildfire crisis event. It requires multiple strategies. It also requires collaboration between agencies and community members. I highlight the implications of effective wildfire risk communication specifically for public agencies involved in wildfire preparedness and response. Their work in managing risk perception and wildfire knowledge for California residents saves lives and communities. The significance of wildfire risk communication becomes very clear when we consider that the wildfire crisis situation in California is trending toward being more severe and destructive, with a longer wildfire season. In the last few years, as these examples show on the chart here, we can see this trend. The 2017, 2018, and 2020 wildfire seasons have been quite severe, with historic levels of damage done in terms of acres burned, lives lost, and property damaged. Wildfire risk communication can be life-saving because it prepares residents for wildfires long before they occur. It can mitigate the risk of wildfires by educating community members about wildfire management practices and supporting them in implementing these practices. Risk communication also supports the work of first responders like firefighters, protecting these responders because the public will be more informed about how to prepare for a wildfire and respond appropriately when there is a wildfire crisis. Let's take a look at some background information, starting with wildfire characteristics. Wildfires are part of the natural world and are to be expected. However, they are very dangerous, deadly, and destructive. They spread very fast, are difficult to contain, and virtually unstoppable. A wildfire can be defined as an uncontrollable blaze that is fueled by dry brush, hot weather, and high winds. An example of a deadly wildfire was the Camp Fire in 2018, with 85 people killed and 17 injured. There were lots of acres burned and structures destroyed, and to date it is the deadliest wildfire in California history. Continuing with more helpful background information, let's look at what causes wildfires. The main causes of wildfires in California are an increasing wildland-urban interface, with more people settling in forested areas prone to wildfires. Climate change is also a factor, as well as fire suppression practices in forest management over the last century in California. These have created a buildup of highly flammable plant matter or fuels in our forests. Important risk factors that predict wildfires are high winds, hot, dry weather, and dry flammable fuels. And these high-risk conditions abound during our wildfire season, which runs from the summer to the fall. Let's now transition to our discussion of risk communication, beginning with some definitions for risk communication and crisis communication. Keeping in mind the stages of a crisis and the continuum of communication that occurs during these stages of preparation, response, and recovery, there are some notable differences between risk communication and crisis communication. Risk communication falls under emergency preparedness and happens before a crisis event, in this case pre-fire. It helps people avoid falling victim to the crisis. There is a focus on education and raising awareness, so making sure that people are informed and knowledgeable about the potential threat of the crisis, what that crisis will look like, and what they can do to mitigate or reduce the risks associated with the particular disaster or crisis. Risk communication really empowers residents and communities to take charge of their preparedness and even prevent a crisis. It is life-saving action that happens well before the arrival of a wildfire. Crisis communication, on the other hand, falls under emergency response and happens when the crisis is underway. It is ongoing during the crisis event and helps people manage the crisis. There is a focus on communication through alerts and notifications, on getting people timely information while the crisis is unfolding. In this case of wildfires, that timely information would be evacuation orders. Communications are very focused on managing evacuations, getting people to safety, and to the resources for navigating the wildfire crisis. In summary, risk communication and crisis communication fall along a continuum, with risk communication happening before a crisis and crisis communication happening during the crisis. And ultimately, for more effective outcomes in emergency management, effective risk communication before the crisis is critical. It can make a world of difference because people will be better prepared for the crisis. Let's now take a look at specific wildfire risk communication strategies. I categorize risk communication strategies and tools under two main types, multidirectional and unidirectional. Multidirectional strategies flow in different directions, while unidirectional strategies flow in one direction. These strategies are aimed at mitigating wildfire risk and managing the public's risk perception by helping the public become more knowledgeable about wildfires and aware of the risks of wildfires and how to prepare for that potential wildfire threat. These are some examples of multidirectional and unidirectional risk communication strategies. Multidirectional strategies are active, conversational. There is a back and forth kind of interaction. They are not one-sided. Questions can be asked by members of the public, and they can get clarification from public agency officials. This kind of communication is highly interactive and collaborative. It can happen in person, it can also happen online, as long as there is an emphasis on participation and interaction. Steelman and McCaffrey discuss the value of this interactive facet of multidirectional risk communication for wildfires and just how critical and effective it is for wildfire risk communication. Unidirectional strategies are passive, focused on disseminating information, getting information out to the public. This can be through television, broadcasts, radio, kiosks with information that people can come and pick up, emails, mailing lists, newspapers, flyers, brochures, as well as risk indices. Risk indices are used for disseminating information, and they track risk factors like wind and weather conditions and highlight when there is a high potential for a wildfire. We'll take a look later on at one of these indices called the Santa Ana Wildfire Threat Index. Let's take a closer look at multidirectional strategies. The main strategy that is most effective for multidirectional strategies or tools is community gatherings, bringing people together through meetings, workshops, panels, forums. There's lots of interaction and discussion. Questions can be asked and answered. It's ongoing and consistent, very open and accessible. Members of the public get to meet and talk with agency officials, so it's really bridging the divide between agencies and communities. This kind of multidirectional communication can also happen out in the community when agency workers and officials go door to door to visit with community members and talk with them. A great example is Forest Service workers going to residents in the wildland-urban interface and talking with them about wildfire management practices. They even engage in wildfire management projects with these residents, working collaboratively, doing projects that center around mechanical thinning and prescribed burns. They also talk with residents about what kinds of building materials are recommended for these areas and how residents can use fire-resistant materials when they build homes or set up structures. In summary, there's an emphasis on interaction, collaboration, people and agencies working together to enhance wildfire preparedness and risk mitigation, and ultimately reduce the risk of wildfires. Unidirectional strategies are also very useful and can be used in conjunction with multidirectional strategies. Some examples for unidirectional strategies are the use of metaphors, non-technical language, and risk indices. For metaphors, monster framing is highly effective for risk communication. Research shows that if wildfires are called monster wildfires as opposed to major wildfires, people perceive the risk as higher. So agencies can use the phrase monster wildfire when putting out broadcasts on television or radio, or when using newspapers or online media to disseminate information. And this will get the attention of viewers and readers and help them perceive the level of risk being communicated to them. Another strategy is the use of non-technical language, making sure that the language used in risk messaging is very basic, easy to understand and remember. More technical and scientific language can be used during in-person gatherings where people can ask for clarification. But when information is being put out in a unidirectional or passive way, it should not be too technical. This allows for diverse community members with different educational backgrounds to be able to understand these basic messages. One other effective strategy for unidirectional communication is the use of risk indices. The Santa Ana Wildfire Threat Index for Southern California is very helpful for communicating to community members the level of wildfire risk. We'll take a closer look at the index. So here is a screenshot of the website for the Santa Ana Wildfire Threat Index. This index has been available since 2014 and is a wonderful resource for communicating risk levels to residents in Southern California. You can see at the top of the screen that you can select the view for different zones. For this particular view, we are in Zone 1, LA Ventura. There's also at the top a tab where you can select the map view, and you can take a look at the different risk maps for the 6-day forecast. You can also see the color legend off to the side indicating a level of risk or wildfire threat, and the different gauges at the top for wildfire threat level, wind strength, and fuel moisture. There's also just beneath the gauges a little area for recommended actions that highlight what to do for emergency preparedness. At the bottom of the page, you can see the 6 days. It kind of cuts off there, but below that for each day, there would be a color code that indicates the level of risk for that 6-day forecast. So just an overall wonderful resource for communicating risk to residents in Southern California. Of course, it's most useful for residents with internet access, but it can also be shared via television, radio, or newspaper with residents who do not have internet access. Some considerations to keep in mind for risk communication. It is important to always keep in mind the audience for risk messaging, of course. Residents in the wildland-urban interface are the main audience to consider because they live in fire-prone areas and bear the highest risk for loss of property and loss of life. However, all California residents can benefit from risk messaging because we are affected by wildfires. It's also important to keep in mind people's preferred or available and accessible modes of communication so that those are the tools or modes that are used for risk communication. Audiences in different geographical areas, for example, may not have internet access. Those in rural areas may rely more on television and radio, so that's something to keep in mind. Education and income levels are important to consider as well. Studies show that those with higher education and income levels are likely to pay attention to risk communication and comply with it. So we want to make sure that we are finding ways to meet other community members where they are, making sure that community members who have low levels of income or low educational levels are receiving messaging that is relevant for them. Men and women differ in how they respond to risk communication. Women are more likely to comply, so we need to make sure that messaging keeps men in mind and is targeting them in relevant ways. Long-term homeowners and those with valuable possessions and pets also tend to disregard the risk messaging, so it's important to target them. Behavioral considerations matter. People tend to overestimate their ability to protect their home and fight a wildfire, and they might say that they will respond to risk messaging or to evacuation orders, but their behavior in times of crisis changes. So it's very important that risk communication makes sure that people are aware beforehand of the very real risks and dangers of a wildfire. Here is a quick look at some of the agencies that this exploration of risk communication would be relevant for. At the state level, we have the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, and the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. At the federal level, we have the U.S. Forest Service and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The emphasis for these agencies would be on creating and sustaining partnerships with each other and with community members while making use of multiple risk communication strategies. In conclusion, wildfire preparedness in California is something that needs to be done statewide. Public agencies tasked with emergency preparedness and response are engaged in this work and need to enhance it through more collaboration and partnerships. Libraries are an important resource for this kind of work because we do interact with a lot of community members. We can offer a space for these gatherings where conversations happen about wildfire risk and preparedness. Public agencies can partner with libraries to share information and enhance public knowledge about wildfires. In summary, effective wildfire risk communication happens well in advance of an actual wildfire event, makes use of multiple strategies and tools, and requires extensive positive collaboration between agencies and community members. Here is my list of references and resources used for this presentation. And here is a photo index with photo credits for the photographs used in this presentation. This concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.